All right, we're back for the second part of Andrew Jackson's presidency. I mentioned last time that our learning targets while discussing Andrew Jackson would be to talk about Jacksonian democracy, which we did in the last video. We also talked about the nullification crisis that erupted over the tariff of 1828, the tariff of abominations, and we discussed that. The other two learning targets that I wanted to cover was going to be Andrew Jackson's battle with the Bank of the U.S. and then his Indian policy. And we're going to cover those two today. We're going to start with the Bank of the United States. Andrew Jackson did not like banks. And it started when he was a younger man out west, and he had been a bit of a land speculator, which means you buy land at a low price and then you sell it at a higher price. And it was during this time out west, Andrew Jackson lost money. He blamed it on the banks. And so he's got that background going into all of this. But the Bank of the U.S., Andrew Jackson felt that it had too much power. And he felt this way for a number of different reasons. One, that it benefited the rich New England businessmen over the farmers in the West. That it was more liable to give loans to the businessmen that lived in the Northeast, New England, Massachusetts, Connecticut, that area there, as opposed to farmers out west. So that's one reason. Second, it stood in the way of entrepreneurs out west. And that goes along with what I just said. An entrepreneur is anyone who wants to start their own business. And a lot of people, when they go to start their own business, need to get a loan from the bank. And so there's that reason. Three, Bank of the U.S. gave lots of loans to members of Congress, senators, representatives. And so would those people feel like they owed anything to the bank for doing that, like when they go to pass laws? So Jackson thought that the bank wielded too much power, and that's one of the reasons why. And then, as I said earlier, he lost money early in his career, and he mistrusted banks. Number one reason he hated the Bank of the U.S., he hated the president of the Bank of the U.S., a gentleman by the name of Nicholas Biddle. Jackson and Biddle did not like each other, and so that's really going to fuel Andrew Jackson as he goes to try to close down the Bank of the U.S. All right? So, here's what happened. Henry Clay is involved. Now, Henry Clay is a good guy. His nickname was the Great Compromiser. He worked with both parties. He tried to do that. He's going to run for president 4 times. He's going to lose 4 times. He ran in the election of 1824, and now it's going to be 1832. But here's what Henry Clay does. In 1836, the license or the charter for the Bank of the U.S. was going to be up for renewal. And that was in 1836. Henry Clay wanted to make this an election issue. So he made sure that the charter was now going to be renewed early in 1832. So now it's an election issue. Jackson is running against Clay. Clay gets the renewal moved up to 1832, and he does it for this reason. He knows that Jackson hates the Bank of the U.S. So if the charter comes to Andrew Jackson, he's going to veto it. If he vetoes it, he's going to lose a lot of votes from the business world. Right? Now, if he signs it and keeps the charter running, then he's going to lose the votes of the farmer, who the farmers don't like the bank. So Henry Clay thinks that he has Andrew Jackson in a tough spot. He's going to lose votes either way. Andrew Jackson vetoes the charter. Then he goes and he wins the election of 1832. He defeats Henry Clay. So Andrew Jackson is now president for a second term. He has vetoed the charter of the Bank of the U.S., and now he is going to close the Bank of the U.S. But how do you close the bank? Well, can a bank operate if it doesn't have money? In this political cartoon, the bank is seen as a seven-headed monster. That's Nicholas Biddle right there in the middle. Andrew Jackson is battling it. Yeah. So, how did Jackson get rid of the Bank of the U.S.? Well, he took the money out. He took the money out of the Bank of the U.S. and he put it in state banks. So the State Bank of Ohio, the State Bank of Kentucky, the State Bank of Virginia, and he put the money there. And these banks were run by supporters of Andrew Jackson, so they were also called pet banks. And without any money in the Bank of the U.S., it closed down. All right? So that issue is now done. So let's take a look at the Jackson's Indian policy. Jackson was not a fan of Native Americans either. As he was growing up in the Army, he had some encounters with Creek Indians, and so that's going to be an issue there. But what he wanted to do is he wanted to take all Native Americans that lived east of the Mississippi River and move them west of the Mississippi River. Right? He saw them as uncivilized. He saw them as savages. And so he wanted to get them to relocate to an area west of the Mississippi that the U.S. government had set aside. It was known as the Indian Territory in present-day Oklahoma. All right. So what the U.S. government started doing is they started signing treaties with Native American tribes. Under these treaties, the tribes said that they would move west in exchange for food, supplies, and money. Another reason that we wanted the Indians moved west is because they were living on great land down south that cotton growers wanted to use. So that was a factor as well. So even after signing treaties, the Indians are pushed off their land. But what I want to do is I want to talk about the 5 civilized tribes. These 5 tribes were living in the southeast United States, so you're talking Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, and they tried their hardest to fit in with white society. That's why they're called the 5 civilized tribes. They started to dress like whites. They started to farm like whites. They started to learn to read and write. And they tried to do all these things so that they could fit into white society. Unfortunately, it's not going to work. And these 5 tribes are the Creek, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, the Cherokee, and the Seminole. Okay, so let's take a look. So if you take a look at the map, in yellow is the areas where these Native American tribes lived, and then in orange you're going to see the Indian Territory, and that's where they're going to be located. Now, some went willingly, others were forced by gunpoint to go, and we'll take a look at that. All right. So, in 1830, at Jackson's request, Congress passes the Indian Removal Act. Nice name, huh? So, under this, the U.S. makes treaties with the tribes, and then they're moved west of the Mississippi. The Supreme Court came out and said that the Indians don't have to move. Jackson refused to listen to the Supreme Court. Said, if John Marshall wants to say this, let him enforce it. John Marshall was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So Andrew Jackson just completely disregarded the Supreme Court and still had the Indians moved by force in some cases. If you take a look at the Sauk and Fox Indians, they were up near Illinois. They went to the Indian Territory, didn't like it, said, hey, we're done, we're going back home. That led to something known as the Black Hawk War. The chief of the Sauk and Fox was a gentleman by the name of Black Hawk. When they tried to return back to their homeland, the U.S., the Army, encountered them. Black Hawk War. A lot of the Native American men were killed in the battle, and then they were forced to go back to the Indian Territory. Future president that fought in the Black Hawk War on the side of the U.S. Army was Abraham Lincoln. Seminoles. The Seminoles were from Florida. They spent 10 years fighting back. But their chief, Osceola, led a 10-year battle against the U.S. Army trying to force the Seminoles to the Indian Territory. After 10 years, some Seminoles did move to the Indian Territory, but a lot of other ones were able to escape into the swamps of Florida, where their descendants still live today. All right. In 1836, the Creek Indians, in handcuffs, thousands of them, forced to move to the Indian Territory. And then that leads us to the Trail of Tears. And this is the one that is the most popular of all the fights by Native Americans to avoid being sent to the Indian Territory. The Cherokee Indians. Cherokee, they created their own alphabet. They created a constitution similar to the United States. They owned ranches. They dressed like the white man. They did everything they could. Supreme Court said they didn't have to leave. Andrew Jackson said, yeah, you do. And in 1838, 17,000 Cherokees are going to be forced by the Army to relocate to the Indian Territory. This is during wintertime. Anything they have, they carry, and they're marching all the way from Georgia to what is today Oklahoma. And on the way, 25% of the Native Americans died. 4,000 Native American Cherokees died on the Trail of Tears, hence the name. Some Cherokee were able to escape into the forests of North Carolina. Their descendants still live there today. All right, so we took a look at the Sauk and the Fox. We took a look at the Creeks. We took a look at the Seminoles. We took a look at the Cherokee. The main goal of the United States was let's get all these Native Americans west of the Mississippi River. Andrew Jackson was very pleased that his Indian policy had been a success. All right. And the white Southern farmers, they were glad that they were gone too, because now they could use that land to grow more cotton. All right, so we've looked at those 4 issues during Andrew Jackson's presidency. So you know what to do. Google Slides, watch the video again, textbook, questions,